No, we okay. We're saying they don't hear you. Do you hear me? Me, 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 me. Yes, they hear me, me, me. They don't hear you, you.
How about me? Can you hear me now? Haha, can you hear me now? Ah, there. What? No? 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 Yes? Haha, there we
Yes,
go.
yes, no, yes,
Fantastic.
yes, no.
So, rewind, back forth.
Emi, 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 emi,
Yep,
emi.
yep. Walk back through the tavern. All right, we're good. So, as I was saying, I guess I was miming to everybody that this is the first tavern talks we've had since the hype of Gen Con is finally starting to set in. And kind of relaxed from. We came back. We were super excited from Gen Con. We wanted to talk about it. But this week, we're getting into something a little different. But I'm really excited to hear about the conversations that are going to be made here. And a lot of this is going to be how do you bring D&D and other tabletop role-playing games into an educational setting. I personally have no experience in this, but Corey here is an educator by trade, so of course he's going to have a lot of stuff to talk about. And our guest actually does this on a professional level, where she does this in a educational sense as well. So she'll be joining us just here in a little bit. So if the screen goes really wonky really fast, you'll know why. But yeah, so I'm going to toss this over to Corey and shut up for a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So, a little background for me. I at one point got to have a real fun job traveling the U.S. and Canada, doing educator professional development. Um, and it was in two different areas. One was flipped learning, which was basically using video and how to use video in your learning, but that's not what we're talking about today. And the other was game-based learning and how to use games to help keep students engaged, how to have not just games but game design, how you can have your students designing games around your learning objectives and stuff like this. So and I do have some of the tabletop games that and I didn't bring them all because I literally have like 30 different tabletop games that I kind of took with me on the road and shared with teachers on how to use, but I only have a handful here. I'm going to talk a little bit about them, and Megan can't join us right away because she is actually in class right now. So we are waiting for her. She said she'd be about 20 minutes late or so, and then we'll jump into the role play, the role play games part of it. So the first game I want to talk about, and it's actually a whole game company, but I just brought the smaller of the boxes of what I have. This is Subatomic. This is by Genius Games. If you have children or teach children and you want them to be interested in STEM or science, look up Genius Games. They're they're a great way to kind of play games at the table and learn about science. This one's actually a deck building game, so if you like deck building games, Subatomic is a great way. Thank you for popping up the link there. All right, another one here is Code Monkey Island, which is basically about coding, and for real young kids to learn kind of the basics about variables and how to code and stuff. Another one I used a lot. which is Happy Salmon, which is a very active game, and it's not so much the Happy Salmon game that's learning. It's the fact that you can take this Happy Salmon game um, and have students create their own version with their learning objectives. I won't go into too much how I modeled that, but I shared that one as well, and that's North Star Games Happy Salmon. And then the last one here, if you like collaborative games, if you're a fan of Pandemic, for example, um, this is a social studies game called Freedom, and it's about the Underground Railroad. And it's a collaborative game where you're trying to um, help the abolitionists achieve their goal while saving slaves from the South and helping them get to Canada. And this is by Academy Games, Freedom. And I will say, not just as an educational, my opinion of this game is that Freedom is one of the best collaborative games I've ever played
Oh wow.
because it's engaging, it has storyline, it has all these cards about real historical people, and the gameplay itself, I like it better than Pandemic. Um, and it's more strategic than a lot of collaborative games, and I'm gonna roll Pandemic into this. Uh, you get to that phase where it really is luck. Are we gonna draw the wrong card right now? And in the game. Um, Freedom has that element, but it is so minute that if you're playing uh, a normal what do you call it difficulty game, um, you really can just strategize and talk and be able to get through it on strategy alone. Um, there are some dice rolls where the people who are trying to hunt down slaves move things around the board, but it's just moving things around the board. It's not drawing a card that totally messes everything up. So, yeah, those are some of my go-tos as far as game-based learning, and those are just tabletop games. So I'm going to throw it over to James. What are your thoughts? What are your questions? Interview me a little bit about game-based learning, and I'll see if I can answer that, and then we'll try to delve a little bit into role-play games.
Okay. So I guess my biggest thing is trying to come up with a way that is both educational and learning based. So a lot of times, we've seen a lot of things, especially for tabletop role play, where it's used kind of as more of a therapeutic, calming, or getting yourself out of your own head type mentality. I apologize. I'm turning on our custom rewards just to make sure if people want to ask questions, we see those pop up. But for me specifically, I've never done anything in an educational sense. I don't have an educational background. What is the things that you look for when you're looking at games, or you're looking at tabletop role plays that stand out to you in an educational sense?
So, really, it comes down to one thing: does the gameplay, does what the tasks that you're asking your students or the learners, because it can be adult learners too, right? Matter of fact, that's kind of what we're looking to do with the Savage Worlds module that the other James and I are designing. You're trying to make sure that the things that the players are trying to do in the game match the objectives that you want them to learn. So and I'll give you some bad examples to try and frame what I'm talking about. There are a lot of educational game designers that design like websites and things that are called educational games. But all that the student or the learner is actually doing is clicking the mouse. And they really could win the game just by clicking faster.
Yeah.
And not really trying to learn the math or put words together or whatever it is that they're trying to learn. So I guess if I was going to hinge it on one thing, it would be make sure that you're asking the learner to do the thing that you want them to learn in the game. And as far as role play goes, I think that the role play situations that you frame, they do kind of have to be a little bit railroady, because you want to set up a scenario where they are actually tackling the objective at hand, so to speak, and they're not just I, I I I jump into the water. You know, it's like okay, well, okay, let's work with that. So, um, and thank you, Flying Pepsi Truck. I'd say that on air. I know you did it in the chat, but
Yeah. Yeah. So I
so
remember growing up, I had a lot of, and I'm probably the weird one, but like there were games that I would find on within the Scholastic books. They would be like software games or something like that. I think it's
right,
interesting though when you can get the same experience, but it's a little, in my opinion, because I really started falling in love with tabletop role playing games and board games, is because you're getting that very close experience with other people,
mm-hmm.
and you just don't get that in a video game all the time, especially back in early 2000s, late 90s, because there wasn't internet games that very popular at that point. But so when you're looking at games specifically for educational purposes, what are you seeing most that are, or what are you seeing the best bang for your buck when it comes to getting an educational experience but also being an enjoyable game? Like, is there a specific type of uh, course that you've seen is more common? Like, is math more acceptable to seeing this kind of thing, or is it history? What's the
So I would say I mean I showed some history, I showed some STEM and some science, some language arts is what I use the Happy Salmon for. Um, I think that the bang for your buck comes from designing games, and
okay?
I'll kind of walk through that process. So with the school district, and the sad part is this whole idea kind of fell flat March of 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in 2019, in the beginning of the school year of 2019 to 2020, I launched a middle school game design contest, and it was called Making Games That Matter. And the middle schools in the district could, students could submit their game. But where we started with was showing them some educational games, talking about freedom, saying this is a fun game to play, but there's this learning that happens with it. What do you want to teach someone? And basically, the challenge statement was create a game that either brings awareness to, teaches something about, or tries to impact mental health at the high school, middle school level, right? So think about what mental health challenges there are for your peers, and let's make a game that helps them. So when you say bang for your buck, I think it's when you give them the tools to make their own game, and then say, here's the learning objective that you're trying to make this game around. And some of them were role play games. Some of them, well, they were role play scenarios. They weren't. They didn't build like the game mechanics. They just said, here's
Mm-hmm.
the scenario. Um, some of them were kind of like apples to apples with different terms to bring awareness
Mm-hmm.
to the different mental health things. Um, that was a little challenging because we didn't want it to become a comedy making fun of mental
Yeah.
health.
Right. No, I can
So
agree with that. That's going to be that had to have definitely been a challenge on that end, because like I know apples to apples can go south real quick.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, if you're asking about bang for your buck in game-based learning, I think the easiest way to get people to learn is when you show them how to make a game, and then say, now make a game that teaches X. And I've had probably about, let's see, I've been doing that project with different schools for about 8 years, and there's always a group of students that just digs in. Some of them, just like any other project, you're going to have some students that aren't interested in games. They're more interested in other things. But then there's that group that digs in and makes this amazing thing for other students to play through.
Yeah.
So,
Part of a organization here on base that, or in our location, where we can we sponsor a lot of STEM initiatives, and seeing some of the things that that kids are coming up with is just beyond me. It's never would have even um, expected some of these projects that the kids have taken on. When I say kids, I mean these are mostly middle school, high school, but
Yeah.
some of the skills that these they know at this level of age is just incredible. Um, one off the top of
Yeah,
my
there was.
yeah, like one of the top of my head was is like, what is the best filament to send to Mars? And I was like, why? Like, what? Like you're and the crazy thing is they've got the graphs that back the logic up. They've got the math that's built behind it. They have the and we live right by well part of our we live right by NASA, so they go over to NASA and they speak to them and they get the statistics from that. But these are high school kids. These are and like I said, and if there's ways we can develop kids in a way that they can use games, they can use tabletop role plays to not only the social and the mental capabilities of what it brings to people. One of my main reasons I've ever played D&D was to get out of the situation I was in. I've been in some very
Yeah.
dark situations in my life, and this kept me from losing it. And because you can step out of your own, you can step out of your skin for a few hours, and especially if you have a really engaging game like Dungeons and Dragons or
Hmm.
other even some board games though like there's board games that do the same thing. Some of the board games I saw specifically at Gen Con were above my knowledge set. It would take me a year just to figure out how to play the darn thing. It's 65,000 pieces, but I digress on that one because I was just like,
Yeah.
wow, it's just there's so much to when you think of board games and then you get stuff like Malafox or Blood Feud or a couple of other ones out there,
Well,
and
I
I'm
can't
just
wait to
like,
to do blood feud here.
I couldn't believe the amount of pieces and yeah, Gloomhaven. Um, I mean, these aren't games that you play for like. But then, like I said, it comes back down to the idea that you're stepping out of your skin for this. You're going into a game that's not going to take 20 minutes to play. We're talking hours and hours. It's the new it's Risk, but with a lot more mental stability requirements. Um,
And you bring up a good point, like taking some of those really complex games and breaking them down for younger students or
mhm.
younger learners. Like if you're saying uh, taking those big box games and going kind of taking your time to teach those, that can be a great learning experience for
Yeah,
students, if you actually have the time to do it. Now most
yeah,
teachers don't have the time. Matter of fact, I'll pick this one back up because I think it's a perfect example of that. This is not a young kids game,
right.
right? This is it's I mean it's on par with um pandemic as far as like
Uh,
complexity of how to play it,
Complexity and
right?
understanding, right.
um
Another
but
one,
the
like,
publisher gave us a book that says lesson by lesson, how do you teach this game to younger kids?
that's a genius thing. I mean, to me, I think
So
that's the epitome of how to help people through that kind of thing. Um, and it's definitely something that we've definitely thought about when we're looking at one of the some projects down the road is how do we get people these lesson plans for these games, because a
yeah,
lot of times, I mean, even for tabletop role playing games, some of them are extremely advanced, and if they're too advanced, then it takes forever, or you have to get lucky to find the one person who knows who's been playing it and then understands it.
yeah,
And that to me is very difficult sometimes. It's like going from this to, you know, and not saying anything bad about any of these games. So do not take that, because I love most of the games that I'm going to mention. But going from like Dungeons and Dragons to World of Darkness, like Vampire the Masquerade, two
yeah.
completely different concepts, two completely different mindsets, um, two completely different rule sets. And then you go from there to let me think. What's some other ones like? like Savage Worlds. It's a completely different one. Cortex, completely
Yeah.
different set of rules. And then you go into even deeper things like the Burning Wheel, which is mostly a story based game completely. And I think a
Right.
lot of these are really great for collaborative learning, but at the same time you have to have somebody who's there who can walk you through those basic steps first to get them comfortable with the game that they're
Or if you
playing.
go to some of the more crunchy, D&D 3.5 or
Yeah, or
Pathfinder,
Pathfinder.
they're yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to,
So
work your math a little bit more, you're going to go to something like that. If you want to be a little less rough on uh, the stats, and you want to have more of a flowy, you stay with D&D or something a little more story based rather than math based.
so going back to what you were saying about the students, and you're kind of amazed by what they come up with in those STEM projects and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, right? I mean, I totally that's when I can't wait till Megan gets here so we can kind of edge into that.
And she's here.
Um, and she's here.
Yeah. So I don't think she's. So let me have her hop in. So it's going to be a really quick fix on this, but we're going to have her pop in here, and it's going to jack up the screen for like 2 seconds, and then we're going to be good to go. Let me just hop in video. Right, so wait for that to shift out, and then I'll hit our transition, and we'll be. Make sure you can see it.
So I'll just tell this little story since we're talking about genius kids and coming up with stuff. One of the students in our school district actually in one of those STEM projects like you were talking about, James,
Mm-hmm.
created a she created a water detection system to detect. This was right after the what was that, Flint, Michigan stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And her invention landed her on the what is it called, Marvel Hero Project group.
Oh yeah.
So there's a show on Disney called Marvel Hero
Mm-hmm.
Project, and she was one of their heroes that they made a comic book about and everything. So yeah, I mean, when we talk about kids having lots of smarts and being able to do stuff,
Yeah.
I do think don't sell them short, right?
Yeah.
Don't sell them short about what they can do. And now that we have Megan,
Oh,
let's
sorry about that. I was
or at least this
we,
much
we
of
have
Megan.
we have this
I'm
much of
getting my
Megan.
camera. I'm getting everything fixed. I am really sorry.
No, you're fine. We know that you're coming straight from a game.
I was
So
actually doing the kids.
so yeah. So Megan, just a little quick background on her before, and then I'm just gonna let her talk and give the full background. But I met Megan through a group on Facebook. She was speaking about the fact of how to uh, teach learning, and that's what her main focus is with children. So without any further of my talking, I'm going to hand this off to you and kind of let you give your little elevator speech.
Okay, first I'll apologize about camera trying to get angles. I run games for kids. I've been doing it for about 3+ years, and I have found it to be a fantastic educational vehicle for a lot of kids that have a lot of different struggles. And if you basically use it as both a social way to engage that they may not otherwise have, and learning skills that they might struggle with learning otherwise. Um, I've had groups that have been together for about 2.5 years now or more, of friends like all over the country, and it's just kind of been nice to see the effect.
So before we go into any sort of craziness, what is your average age group? So I'm just curious, are you talking
Um,
younger kids? Or are we talking middle school? What's the average age?
Middle school, probably like typically between 11 and 14 is kind of my target range. I will. Um, I have some kids that are younger. I have some groups that are like 8 or 9, and I have some groups that are older teens, and I have a few kids that are even have gone into college and have stuck with me as like they're entering their first year of college.
Awesome.
So it kind of varies, but basically 11 to 14 would be kind of the magic number, so to speak.
And as do you, and just because like I said, we had a brief chance to talk, but we haven't had a lot. So do you mainly use Dungeons and Dragons, or is there a specific format that you seem is better suited for younger children?
With this age, I do just pretty much all Dungeons and Dragons, but there's a
Okay.
lot of RPGs out there that are really good.
Mm-hmm.
I know people that have had success with Masks. If you know that one,
I
it's
don't.
it's I've never really run it, but it's ideal for kids. And there's a couple other RPG systems, but I just particularly think that fifth edition is really well designed, especially for younger kids, like around that 11, 12. They can kind of, the mechanics are simplified enough where they can get it, and the role play is heavy enough where they don't feel like they're getting bogged down into mechanics,
Okay.
because that's really important. The minute the kids feel like they are struggling to master those core features, like the math and all of that, they will pull back. If you get something like Savage Worlds, like I could be by like maybe a little bit more mechanic heavy, or Pathfinder. Sometimes they struggle a little bit more with that one,
Mm-hmm.
because like that's a lot of number crunching and a lot of things they have to remember, and then it becomes a little bit harder for them, and that's kind of when it stops being fun, when they feel they're not catching on.
So I want to ask a question that James asked me before you got here, which I thought was a great question. Um, where do you think you find educationally? Where do you find the biggest bang for your buck? So when you're trying to help learn specific skills, what would be kind of your go-tos when you're working with kids?
Clearly, math. You have to do very quick calculations in your head eventually. You do see that skill improved. Um, Problem solving is probably the number one. Think about it logically. Um, it's not an academic skill per se, but just group work. That dynamic of you're working together to solve a problem is not something a lot of kids like necessarily inherently are taught,
Mm-hmm.
and they can struggle with that. And I've seen kids that like start off wanting to do their own thing, and by the end of it, it's like the team, and we want to work together. And I think that probably is the single most valuable skill they're actually getting out of it. But problem solving would be secondary.
Okay. Now, are you creating a custom game, or are you running a custom module? What's the if I was, so mainly the focus is if I was going to be looking at playing more so for children, are you doing based on a module, or do you have a complete homebrew that you run with?
I do both.
Okay.
I do module campaigns, like the Sentinel of Avernus, Waterdeep, things like that. But then also I have introductory courses that are 6 week kind of one shots that I've created, designed to kind of help guide kids into the game. I have about half dozen or more of those that I put together that I run. So I kind of do both concurrently.
Okay.
And it's just usually they'll start with the ones I create and then want to do an ongoing campaign off of that. And then a lot of times I'll do homebrew campaigns for groups just in general. So I've had some groups that have been together a really long time. They don't really want their, I know their interests and they're a little bit more specific. So I will come up with a whole homebrew campaign for them. And then I even had a student that wrote his own campaign that really wanted me to try it. So I ran the student's campaign for this group that he'd been part of, that where they were actually running his game, and it was kind of cool and fun experience that way.
Oh, that's good because you're also focusing on writing skills and helping. And I guess that's one of those kind of, like you said, math is a go-to, but I could also see language arts as a go-to, especially if it's like, hey, you got to keep your notes. If you don't keep your notes, you're not gonna know what's happening from session to session. So,
And reading too, because like I'll get parents that'll message me like that they can't get their kids to read, the book they need to for school or get really into something, but they'll read the monster manual back and forth and have it memorized, and then on to the next book. And I think that's just kind of true to everybody. that we read stuff that we're interested in. We kind of
Right.
sometimes forget that with kids, but if we put them in this category that we don't put ourselves in, a lot of times
Correct.
when it comes to that, and it's like if they're into it, they'll read about it. And so I've I mean, you do see the end result like of kids reading more and getting into that, and then they're looking for the next thing, and so that I think is a big draw too.
Okay, so I'm gonna point at the elephant in the room here. How do you keep middle school kids from becoming murder hobos?
Sometimes you don't. You try your best. um, a lot of times, a lot of times it's just a group dynamic. Often the bigger issue is keeping them from adopting everything. So I ran a class earlier today. They had intellective hours, and they were making a firm case that they just looked like puppy dogs with legs. Why can't we animal handle this? And they were very. And I found like if you really want them not to be murder hobos, put animals in front of them.
Yeah.
People they really don't care that much about. They'll go to a village and they'll say, "What can we rob? What can we destroy?" One trick I do is I will tell them sometimes there's a level 20 battle master retired who lives here. You don't know who they are or where they are. They're just there. And that will
So
keep
giving
things in
them
check.
that sense of fear without just being like everybody is going to murder you, but you could run into that one
Just
guy.
that one guy.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm genuine when I say like if they like even like monsters and animals like they tend to pull back. So the difference it's a very interesting thing to see. So I tend to do creature heavy things a lot of times, especially with new players. I mean, I've seen them try to animal handle skeleton horses, everything. I had one student literally in tears because a rust monster the rest of the group was killing. So I'm like, okay, maybe you find a baby afterwards. I don't know, but it's just one of those things. But as for, I mean, you have to kind of do actions and consequences. That's the realistic answer.
Yeah.
Once they realize that they can't just do anything with impunity, they kind of pull back. Like when they first start playing, they come in thinking, I can do all this incredible stuff. I am a god in this world. They're level 1. So you kind of have to remind them a little bit what level 1 is in this world. And you try to do that in a nice way because I mean, they're younger and the things that adults can handle, they can't always emotionally handle in the same way. So you try to do it in a gentle way a little bit, but you still try to do it.
So, can you give us an example of how you would deal with something like that, like an action versus a consequence for a newer, younger player?
One thing I mean, I have people get arrested a lot in my games. Like when they steal, they get arrested. There's town guards that show up, or they lose. One of the best ways you can do it, and I mean, it will really hit home, is they lose treasure. Somebody was going to pay them something, and they did something they weren't supposed to do, so they are no longer getting paid. And once that gold stops coming in, then the rest of the group is, hey, wait, what did you do to us? We just didn't get paid, and then they'll start to think about it. Or you take damage because you were at a temple and behaved in such a way that a god is going to punish you.
Okay.
Doesn't kill you, but it's enough to kind of
Yeah. Slap on the wrist,
Yeah.
get some motion of difference. Okay.
But I find a pocketbook is probably the best way. When they start losing gold over their actions, it can have some consequences to it.
So you killed the two
Um,
guards and you're just supposed to rescue the dude? Yeah, sorry, $100, 100 gold you're not getting this time.
Well, yeah, or they like a teammate got arrested, so they have to pay to get him out, and they're like, I've seen people like, do we have to free him? Like we weren't part of this. Do we have to get him out? We would prefer not to. We weren't that invested in him.
Well, I guess at that point that guy's got to write a new character. Or make him do
So
community service.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say because you started getting into group dynamics, right? And one of the things that you want to promote is that collaboration and problem solving together. Um, how do you handle the player that wants to run everybody, run the character? You do this, you do that, and kind of run the whole party. How do you? Because I know that those personalities, having taught middle school before, are really out there, and especially with group work. When I think about different groups of people, there's always that one group in every 4 or 5 students that wants to run the show, and the rest kind of back off and let them. So how do you overcome that in a D&D setting or into a role play setting?
You get those players a lot, and a lot of times it's they it's kids that have read the book back and forth and they think they have everything nailed down. They kind of like this is what you should be doing, so you should play your character. One rule, I have a very firm rule that no one talks during combat other than the person whose turn it is, because that's usually when those behaviors come out the most. It's like you
Right.
should be doing this instead of that. Um, thank God Zoom has a mute feature. It comes in handy. Um, and I do reiterate to everybody, like, you were a first player at some point and you kind of have to learn, and what you want to do is maybe what they want to do, and you hammer it home enough times, they tend to start to listen to it. Also, a lot of times, what will happen is they get sometimes ignored by the group a little bit, and then they'll kind of back off of that. um, just let this, they'll kind of like, we're going to do a group discussion. One person's trying to dominate it. The rest of the group is kind of not listening to them. And when they're kind of, the rest of the group almost solves the problem for themselves a little bit by not
Hmm.
listening to that person the way they want to. They tend to be a little bit quieter sometimes. Um, but it's just kind of my job to kind of remind. And the trick also then is to draw out, counterbalance to that is the player that maybe isn't talking. Make sure that you mention, hey, they haven't said something for a while. Do you
Right.
have an opinion on this? Let's get everybody's way in. And then sometimes you just have to privately talk to them. I had a situation today of a group where one player felt like another player was just taking a little bit too much control, wasn't listening to them. At the end of the day, I just had to message that person privately saying, hey, this is how the group is feeling. Maybe you could just try to listen a little bit more. Let's just wait everybody's ideas before we just move ahead and do things, and that type of thing. But you have to have a firmer hand, like in, not like dominate, like not railroad, but you have to kind of be really in tune with the group dynamics when you're dealing with kids, because they will take it much more personally. Although I've seen adult groups where that happens too, uh,
Hmm.
but they will take it a lot more personally if they feel like they're getting slighted or anything like that. And a lot of times they have a little bit more trouble of separating character from self. So be
Yeah.
wary of people's feelings are getting hurt in the mix.
Yeah. So we got a question from chat, which is goes along with this. What do you do? What ways do you empower or encourage those shy or hesitant players?
One thing, be really complimentary of their ideas when they come forth with them. The best thing you can, it's not so much the rule of cool, but the creative side of it. If they come up with something kind of off the wall, don't immediately be, well, that kind of goes against raw or this. Kind of just work with them and how can you make this happen. And once they kind of see an idea, maybe that they were a little bit nervous to propose, like come forth and succeed, it can be really cool and draw them out even more. Um, Sometimes play with, like, contact them, kind of work with their backstory, try to work it a little bit more in the elements where they get those moments to shine just a little bit more. And then also understand that not every kid wants to talk, and because somebody's being quiet doesn't mean they're not having a good time. We
Hmm.
sometimes think like the person that's silent at the table isn't enjoying themselves. A lot of times I'll get feedback from parents that my kid absolutely loved this class. I didn't hear very much out of them. I tried to draw them out. They didn't say that much, but that was their comfort level. So
Hmm.
even maybe if somebody's saying two or three things in a session, that might be what they're really comfortable doing. And to push them past that point, I have a lot of students on the spectrum. And there was one student whose mom kind of messaged, like, I've never seen them be this social. And that was them. They would say maybe two or three things. I didn't think they were enjoying it that much, but that was for them being really social. So don't put like a benchmark of how much they have to participate to
Right.
be successful. Like, each kid is going to be different. If my daughter plays, you will never get her to stop talking. If my son plays, he'll contribute just during combat, and that's about it. And he's happy with that too.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely good notes, and that's something that people need to definitely look into as adults as well. Is that a lot of my games you'll have the more dominant speakers, and then you'll have the more dominant combat players. But as long as everybody's having a good time, it's definitely. Um, but I'm curious, and it's very interesting to hear that a lot of the students that are, or the children that you work with that are that have some sort of disability or they're on the spectrum, that this really brings it out for them. My son has ADHD and he's very hard to control at times, and as a dad, it's very difficult. But there's many days where he'll literally sit in the room next to me listening to the stories as I'm talking to my teams that I'm playing with, and it's interesting to see that dynamic. So I'm glad because I can't wait to get him into this, but he's only 7, so he's still little young. We're trying to work it out.
I have two sons on the spectrum. They're not really able to play, but I totally, I think because of that, I'm a little bit more in tuned a little bit sometimes with students because I kind of understand that dynamic. But yeah, it's something that they can get into. It's fantasy, and it's kind of meeting other. A lot of times they're playing with people that are very similar, and like they maybe aren't playing with meeting those people at school, but they're getting it on a line group, and it makes them feel a little bit more connected. Like I said, I've had groups that have stayed together a really long time, and I'll hear like these are my friends.
Right.
Hmm.
And that's really
Um,
what this should be about, is to build lifelong friendships.
my daughter started at 8, so like
Hey,
um,
I'm hoping.
husband ended up DMing her in a group of about 8 other 8-year-olds. It was an experience, but
So do you do this just remotely, or do you have live tables as well? What do you
everything.
do?
Sorry, everything is remotely. It's through a online platform. There's other people doing it as well. Um, and the fellow people that like DM there is on Outschool. I have had nothing but praise I can say about them. They're really cool DMs on there. Almost all of them are parents, and it's kind of fun to talk with them about it. But typically, I mean, it's all through Zoom, and you can have kids from all over. Um, I've had classes with kids that are on the West Coast and then also in Ireland at the same time, so it's kind of interesting with
Wow.
that.
And that is outschool.com. I'm gonna paste it
Mm-hmm.
for chat here.
Yeah, we'll get that. If you want to pop that in our Discord,
I can go
we'll get
ahead
that
and
information out to them.
yeah. Let me just do it also.
I'm gonna have you do it, Corey. That way the
There we
Discord,
go.
because we haven't moved fully to Zoom yet. We're working on Zoom. If anybody wants to help us by donating or giving us a couple more subscriptions, that's literally the next step, is to start moving into a better platform for that. So
Video platform. Yep.
yep.
Zoom is fun. I
Yeah,
get nervous every
and
time I
then,
see an update, but it's fun.
and then you could just, with Zoom, you could mute that agent of Jinx on Sunday nights every once in a while.
I know, right?
So you could be
God.
like, "Boop."
Oh, the Zoom, and it also has a chat feature, which I love because that's really great for the kids. Because there's some kids that's how they want to communicate. They're really nervous to speak, and so like I'll have some that will just only communicate via the chat feature. So I'm kind of keeping up with that. And also I can get like about a dozen private messages via that with students going, my character can do this. Can they sneak off and do that?" And yeah,
Yeah,
so it's a cool feature.
he's not kidding. Once we get Zoom, I'm muting you every once in a while. Just you know who you are. No, Megan, this has been a very eye opener for me, specifically with a younger child. So my 14-year-old's been playing for 3 years now with us, and he plays in one of our weekly games. And he started out that murder hobo, the character who was the most but one other type of character I want to bring up and ask your insight on, because I know kids have this as well. What about the lone wolf? What about the guy who doesn't want to be a part of the team?
That's a very good question because that happens a fair amount
Yeah.
too. Um, there's a couple different ways I handle it. A lot of times I will try to talk to them like, okay, how could your like message them privately, how can your goals work with the team's goals? Like, okay, so maybe you are doing your own thing. What if those goals aligned with what the group's trying to do? So therefore you work together. Um, it might happen. Also, you kind of have to ask them and like be honest about this. Why would the group want to travel with you if you're going on by yourself? Meaning, if it's beneficial for you to be around a group, you have to make them want to be around you.
Right.
Right.
So you kind of have to work with that. And sometimes what is kind of fun to do with them, especially a lot of times the lone wolf characters have a lot of backstory going on, is what I've discovered. They have this huge thing planned out, and they have a goal. And so, is if they can bring other players into it, like start to share, okay, why are you doing this? And the kids actually really like to listen to those things, so they'll
Mm-hmm.
get really into sharing the backstory, like, oh, that's so cool, you're doing that, and they might actually want to join the lone wolf, and it becomes more of a group thing. I had one player whose whole goal was to become a were rat.
A were
Like
rat?
that was his thing. Were rat. He never quite explained 100% why, but it was his goal, and he was really big into it. And he started like, okay, well, I'll share it with the group. And he actually convinced the rest of the group that this was a really cool thing. And instead of becoming a lone wolf, it became the group's goal to find this were rat for him, and kind of work together as a group to make that like a subs. Don't ask like, I. It's just like being were creatures. It's a thing I have discovered. But it became like the group's goal. And so it's kind of like if you can share a little bit back and forth. A lot of times they don't. I'm trying to find the right way to say this. It's not necessarily they want to be the lone wolf. They
Mm-hmm.
have their own story in their head. So it's a way to kind of merge that with the group, or to draw the group into their story too. And maybe the group might have interest in it, or you can merge the two things. It's just kind of becomes, I don't want to say an art form, but you kind of get used to it after a bit of the best way to approach it. And I mean, usually it works itself out.
So on that, well, it's not really the lone wolf thing. It's more like they have this other thing that they try to do, or they try to shock and awe all the time. So I'm gonna do this thing that
The showboat?
nobody was yeah,
Yeah.
showboating. That's a good way to put it. So how do you handle the showboating? And this is probably two totally separate questions, but I've seen them in games I've run for younger people. It it goes together with the violence of combat. So they showboat in a way that they over describe what they're doing during combat
Mhm.
and try to be as violent and as shocking as possible. How do you deal with that?
Well, first you have to. I have very strict instructions when we start classes. First, no player versus player violence. Also, I have just make it known that not everybody is comfortable with violence, and we have to be very careful about our language and descriptions. You have to do that. Some people just cannot handle it, especially when they're young.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to keep that and bear that in mind. And you have to be sensitive to the people, like the young kids that would have issues with that. As for the grandstanding, one thing I've discovered is it often doesn't work out the way they want it to. Kids are very like not shocked by anything. I like had this one player that was working to this big reveal that they were a changeling, and they were going way over the top dramatic in it, and kind of trying to gear the whole session towards it. And then it came out, and the whole entire group was like, "Yeah, so,
Cool.
but yeah, it's fine." We um, and that often will kind of stop those moments. Like if they don't get the reaction, it's usually for a reaction. But I kind of do kind of tend to warn players against, doing things that are grandstanding that would go against the party. So I am going to go attack and stab this NPC because they're there and I want to just go thing. I might ask, why are you doing that? Well,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Well, you have to give me a reason. And I say the reason can't be just because I want to. Now, I realize in an adult game that, I mean, we probably would just say you do the thing that you're going to do. But with kids, you have to give them a certain level of guidance. You kind of have to put that
I've,
hand in.
yeah, I've asked that question to 45-year-old men. So, what's the goal here? Why are you doing
what are you
this?
doing this for?
Yeah.
A lot of times I'll
Yeah,
ask those questions when it's a character that I've been playing with for a while, and then they do something off the wall, like completely off the wall, and you're like, "Why are you doing this?" And as long as they can give me a decent reason, I'll allow it, or I'll at least allow them to try to do it. But I think the whole giving them that response gets them to think for a second, like, okay, why is my character like? Why am I doing this? Is this me doing it, or is this my character interacting in this way?
and that's why you really want to do is you want to make them think. And it's not
Yeah.
just to stop them, but it's like they kind of need to understand that aspect of it, and it helps them with role play and other things. And also that goes back to teaching them skills
Mm-hmm.
of problem solving and logic and things that could be translated to other things. Why am I going to do this action? Why am I taking to saying, or why am I acting this way towards somebody. If you kind of
Right.
stop and ask why, that becomes a different, it, I mean, it really does become a learning tool. I will say with kids, though, I do find something amusing about those things, moments, that they are surprisingly okay with consequences for their actions. In fact, much more so than adult players I have found. Like, like adult players will do chaotic things and then they'll argue with you a little bit more about like the outcome of that. Like that should have worked totally. Kids tend when they do the things, and if it does go forward, they tend to accept the results from it without any question. Like, okay, that seems fair. Okay, I can live with that. I did that. So I do think maybe that's an interesting aspect of kids. I think that's a little bit different. So when it does go through, they will handle whatever happens usually pretty well.
Yeah, I think that there's something just came to mind as well is, asking the why, like, why are you doing this? And then to try and hone in on some of those, and this is not something I actually thought to do when I was running with kids, but now that you're talking, it makes me think to forward a little bit, is actually asking them, okay, you have this reason why you want to do this chaotic thing. What do you think some potential outcomes might be when you
Mm-hmm.
do it? And then after having that conversation, they've at least explored. Oh yeah, the town guard could come lock me up. And you have these consequences already thought about, and they may back down from that showboating or chaotic activity.
Oh yeah, they when they and that's definitely part of it, and it's always kind of fun when another student might mention it to them because like that because the whole group's usually thinking that way. But yeah, when they start to actually think about consequences, because they typically, I mean, kids, I mean, their brains have not fully developed. They're not as mature, so they typically don't always think to the very end result. They just
Right.
think of the moment, and like you said, taking that next step is a skill building thing for them. So they can start to think about that, and yeah, oh, I'm going to get arrested for this, or there's five other bad guys behind them that are going to come after me, maybe, or that roaring I heard in the background, that could be something maybe I shouldn't mess with. So it is kind of a chance to develop that part of um, a child's brain in a way that's once again fun for them. We as parents typically try to do that actions and consequences
Mm-hmm.
thing with them, and a lot of times it's the rules and you follow the rule or you get punished in some way or form. And this is a much more entertaining way to learn the same lesson and kind of develop those same mental skills.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears again. I'm shifting a lot because we don't have much time left, and I got a lot of questions. So sorry.
Sorry.
The you work with lots of young kids. Could you talk to us a little bit about the differences in gender, like your female players versus your male players, and how does that dynamic work when your players are also going through puberty? So
There isn't as much of a difference as you might think. Um, I do find that the girl players tend to be typically a little bit more problem solving oriented. Um, they might think things out just a little bit more. But I have had some of my biggest potential murder hobos be female players. Um, um, the biggest thing I think is would be communication. I just think that I don't know exactly the how or why, but I do think that girl players tend to talk more, talk it out more, want to discuss the options a little bit more. Um, but I do see that I mean, there's more and more female players coming in, and so part of it maybe was about 2 years ago it might have stood out a little bit more. At this point, I mean, it used to be about a 70 or 80 to 20 ratio, and right now I'm at about a 60-40, getting closer to 50-50 all the time. I've had some classes that are all girls, so um, I know
yay!
it's becoming more and more of a thing. And so as more kind of come in, the differences lessen, if that makes sense,
That's
because
awesome.
because it's becoming more and more individual player based versus because they're just players. And that is something that I will say that kind of melts my heart as a female RPGer. Like you just old school gamers sometimes are not always has been accepting. You get the occasional response, um, and that seems to be just fading away. With the kids that are playing now, it's just not something they even pay attention to, very much, at all. So it's kind of been nice to see that happen. But yeah, the only difference I would really say would be communication, and it's just talking a little bit more and really trying to weigh the different options.
That's really great for me to hear that it's that you have these groups of 60-40 and it going towards 50-50. Mainly I say that because having worked in a middle school, and if you leave it up to them to group up, the boys and the girls group up separately. You don't get very many groups of you know multiple genders grouping up voluntarily because they're terrified of each other at 11 to 13,
Yeah.
right? Um, so that's really good for me here. I'm glad about that.
Well, and then when they sign up for my classes, they don't know who else is signing up usually. So that's
Right.
kind of the benefit of that is you're getting a whole bunch of people, but you don't know who they are exactly. And it's really kind of cool to see these groups of like total strangers at the very beginning, like at the very end of it, become very close. I kind of mentioned this over several times, but that's a very satisfying thing. And you see a lot of friendships cross that gender barrier where um, I have some groups that have shared like with parental approval, always a parental approval of shared contact information. And so I was running a game earlier today where one of the players was like she was telling one of the other players, "Oh, that's not how you told me you were going to do it earlier." And like so they had been talking about the things that
Mm-hmm.
they were going to do beforehand. But yeah, I mean, it's and they don't know who's going to sign up. You do get these more gender mixed groups, and
Hmm.
that can be, I think, a positive.
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
not. I mean, there is comfort like in being an all girl group or something similar, but I do think it's kind of fun to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah. No, I,
Okay,
I,
so we have
I threw my hands up because of that reason, because I've never GM'd an entire all female group, and I really want to try it because I want to see the difference in storytelling and dynamic and talking, and it would just make me a better game master. So,
And the best part about that group was, and you think all female group, and like there's just stereotypes, and we ended up, I think, with a party of three barbarians, one paladin.
yeah,
Like it was like one of my most like hard hitting groups I've ever dealt with, but it was fun.
sounds like fun.
so we have a question from chat, and I think this is probably our last one, then we'll have to
Hmm.
wrap it up. Besides learning and teaching different aspects of basics of life, has this or have you ever used D&D of some type of therapy?
Yes. Um, I've had some students where I have done like one-on-one or individual campaigns, and it's kind of been to work like they maybe the campaign ended where they weren't really up to dealing with a lot of people, and I will design campaigns for them to kind of deal with specific issues that they might be having. I'll talk to them, and I've done this for a few different students at times, and it can be really helpful and kind of slaying monsters are kind of designed to represent specific things for them. Work through skills, kind of like that. They don't have to go at a certain pace, and they can kind of start to build confidence. I think in general it can be used as a therapeutic technique. I don't want to say I have training in that because clearly I don't. I do know there are people that do have training in it that it is being used
Hmm.
as aspects of therapy for kids by people with therapy degrees, psychiatrists. They are programs that have been developed lately dealing with that to kind of use it as a device for therapy by very trained people because they recognize there is something to this. It deals with anxiety very well. It can be incredibly good dealing with various mental health issues. And also, we've kind of mentioned autism, ADHD. Like, those are big things that this game deals with. Not necessarily directly, but it can help. I've seen that happen like in what I do a lot. So I think as a therapeutic tool, it is a very good one. The idea of being able to build a character to be somebody that you're not. When you are going through a lot and you are a kid, and the world is telling you
Mhm.
everything you're supposed to be, and you don't have any power or control, making a character where you have all the power and control and can guide yourself is immensely therapeutic. I mean, we do that as adult role players all the time, so why
Mhm.
wouldn't it be even more so with kids?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you know you kind of said here's the framework and that there's people doing it and that you also kind of put out there, yeah, I don't have training in that. That's very important for all of us to remember is that there you know we may want to do good, but unless we you know it, and that's why I linked Game to Grow in our chat because they actually are therapists. They have
Yeah,
classes that teach you how to do this if you want to use it in a therapeutic way. But they would be the first ones to say, please don't pretend to be a therapist in any situation. So,
I would
uh,
never do that, and
yeah,
you almost always do more harm than good when you do that.
right, right.
So,
But does that mean that people like, does that mean that you can't help by running a D&D game and being present and empathetic and all of that stuff? Absolutely. But if you have a parent come to you and say they suffer from X, can you help with some kind of therapeutic method? Yeah, what you said is perfect. Yeah, I'm not trained in that, but I can run a game and we can have fun and we can, you know, be
Yeah.
more social with one another.
yeah, and that's exactly what I provide. And like I said, what you kind of mentioned, the link you gave would be great for other people who want much more specific
Right.
Hmm.
therapeutic help. And I think it's amazing that people are doing that and kind of recognizing that as a therapeutic technique.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I've like tossed up left and right. Do I go back to school and do that for a living? That would be a great thing to do. And then I go, I'm nearly 50, and going back to school and starting a new career as a therapist who runs games
It's only
is
6 years of
just
your
not in the
life, you know.
cards. It's not in the cards.
Yeah.
My husband's in
But
his last year of going back to college, and it's a thing. It's
Oh, I know
been an
it's a thing.
interesting journey. So,
yeah,
but yeah, just I think sometimes just also not as a therapeutic sense, like in a just helping kids. I think just being an adult who listens
yes.
and doesn't talk down and listens to their ideas and treats it as like a valuable idea
Yeah,
means
and
a lot to kids.
I think that there is a lot of research that shows the mental health of young people is directly tied to how many um, responsible and trustworthy adults they have in their life that listen to them. Um, and that's, I mean, that's just comes from my education background because when we talk about student health and wellness, that is, it doesn't matter who you are in a building, in a school, even if you're, you know, taking out the garbage or doing lunch duty or whatever. If you're an adult who listens to kids and treats them in an empathetic way, and it can save their life. Literally, it can save their life. So those of you who have young people in your life that aren't directly related to you, remember that you can save them just by being who you are and being receptive to their ideas.
I think I'll just say this one last thing about it, just kind of because it's something I very firmly believe in. Sometimes we, as I kind of said this before, adults sometimes forget that the kids are people. Like we expect difference. Like we expect kids to sometimes behave better than we expect ourselves to behave. Like an adult gets angry and we say let it out. A kid gets angry. You need to control that emotion. Like we need to remember that like they respond to things the way we respond to things, and if you can, and like they need to be treated with us the same respect that you would have treated an adult. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so often they're just kind of dismissed as kids. That's just all we're like. You don't need to know that you're a kid, or it's okay. Like just put you in the corner there while the adults are talking,
Mm-hmm.
and that can kind of crush a kid that's desperately trying to share creativity, their ideas, discover who they are, and to just be dismissed out of hand because you haven't reached the right age. I think 'cause
Right.
sometimes we do more harm than good sometimes with that.
Yep, circling all the way back to right before you joined us. Kids can be geniuses, and we can see what they can do, and giving them these opportunities to be expressive, I think is amazing. I love what you're doing, Megan. It's great stuff. Great stuff.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, yeah, we're gonna wrap this up. We're gonna head off. We're gonna do our last call. So, Megan, if somebody has children and they want to get a hold of you, we're gonna post one more time up your link, because what you're doing is incredible, and you need to keep doing it. And as a father of four boys, these types of things are definitely necessary. And like again, thank you again for coming to hang out at the tavern.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a good discussion. Thanks.
For
Thank you.
everybody else, come hang out with us on Sunday as we continue our campaign. And then next week, we will hopefully have our next deep dive with our wizard as we get ready for our charity one shot coming up at the end of October. So, hope you guys all have a wonderful week. Remember, kids are people, and we will see you guys back at the tavern next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.